Good morning, ladies and gentlemen, and dear audience. On behalf of Conflict and Resilience Research Institute Canada, I welcome you all to this special webinar under Project IDEA. And the webinar is titled Making Music Matter in, with regards to Ukraine war. Before I introduce our speaker, let me do the treaty recognition. Conflict and Resilience Research Institute Canada is located on the original lands of Anishinaabe, Cree, Ojibwe, Dakota, and Dene peoples, and on the homeland of Metis people. We acknowledge the treaties and the rights and obligations, and we would like to work together with greater framework within the framework of reconciliation and collaboration in the future. Ladies and gentlemen, it's a distinct pleasure to welcome Darcy Ataman as a speaker today. And he's the founder of Make Music Matter. And you have all the information in the website. But let me tell you very briefly making music matter and how it empowers marginalized voices through innovative music therapy program. And this is the core of Darcy Ataman's work for years together. And initially, it was designed for trauma survivors in conflict and post-conflict zones, and it has been clinically proven to reduce PTSD, anxiety, and depression. Darcy Ataman has worked, and he has a lot of projects running in Africa, and he's very interested to work in Ukraine conflict as well. So I'm just going to share some information from this project because it is really important to understand the length and depth of his work in terms of bringing marginalized voice through music. According to the website information that we have about his work, it says that from survivors of sexual and gender-based violence in the Democratic Republic of Congo to young Syrian refugees with disabilities, Healing in Harmony, what is the title of the project, has helped transform the lives of over 8,500 individuals in 8 countries worldwide. And that is absolutely fascinating. And participants emerge with a renewed sense of agency and self worth. Their original songs are professionally produced and serve as advocacy tools to promote their right to combat stigma. And as I said, it is a distinct pleasure to welcome him. And ladies and gentlemen, a brief description of Project Idea, within which we have requested Darcy to kindly come and share his insights about his project. Project Idea is funded by Heritage Department of Canada under the Digital Citizenship Contribution Program. The main focus of Project Idea is to fight disinformation on Ukraine war. And before I hand over the floor to Darcy, let me also welcome two of our advisors here, David Newman and Mr. Gary Senf. And we are also excited to have our young Ukrainian friend who recently arrived in Canada. And we of course, welcome her comments at the uh, end of Darcy's presentation. So without further ado, let me welcome Darcy. Darcy, floor is yours.
Thank you. And thank you so much for this opportunity. And it's a pleasure to speak to you all. Um, I think what I do first is just explain a little bit about Make Music Matters work, and then ebb into the particular project that I'm doing as an artist inside Ukraine, and that could open up a lot of, I think, fruitful conversation. First, our website needs a little bit of updating. I'm proud to say it's now over 9,500 participants have gone through our program directly, and millions have heard the music. What Make Music Matter works towards is addressing a problem. That problem is trauma and mental health, in particular in conflict and post-conflict zones. And I say this with humility with the young lady here who just came from a conflict zone. So I speak to this stuff knowing we have the expert in the room, which is you. But if you are so traumatized, your life is essentially put on hold. There's not much of a point in trying to get a job, economic opportunity, further your education, or even contribute to your community if you're so traumatized that you literally cannot even get up if you're catatonic. And where Make Music Matter works, we work with survivors of extreme trauma, in these conflict and post conflict zones, to the point where sometimes they are literally catatonic from the trauma. So any other intervention that's offered by other charities and NGOs in the area, again, such as education, even food, microfinancing, skills training, is almost a moot point if none of this will stick. And the only way it's going to stick is if you take care of your mental health and reduce your trauma. So that's number one. The second piece of what Make Music Matter does is help to reduce stigma and advocacy. So, for example, if you are a survivor of sexual violence, and again, I say this with humility as a man on the call when we have a young lady in the room, but if you are a survivor of extreme sexual violence, particularly in the Congo, you are so stigmatized, where chances are you've not only been kicked out of your home, but kicked out of your community and village for what's happened to you. Of course, no fault to your own. And what that does when you extrapolate that across, again, various communities, is that the entire fabric of society, is torn apart and diminishes. When that happens, that vacuum is filled with basically the bad guys. That is how the rebel groups, or people continuing these atrocities, or in the war Ukraine, that is how they win, so to speak, is when that fabric of society is torn asunder, and they can come in and more easily take control. So what Make Music Matter has done is pioneered the Healing and Harmony Music Therapy program. And again, what that does in particular is to reduce PTSD, anxiety, and depression, and then take that from the individual to the community level. And how it works is we actually go and build recording studios wherever we operate in. So, for example, our flagship site is at the Panzi Hospital in the Democratic Republic of Congo in Bukavu, with Nobel laureate Dr. Denis Mukwege. We actually build the studio within the hospital center. And the participants who we treat as artists, they come in twice a week for about an hour within a group, and they maintain that group. And what they do during that time is they work with a local music producer alongside a local therapist. And through the first 3 months of this process, they are going through any other creative process that an artist would go through to write and record an album. While that is happening, the therapist is there in the room to interject therapy in a way, in particular, cognitive behavioral therapy, or CBT, in a way that is not noticed. So when people come in, they don't think, oh my, I'm coming in for my therapy appointment or my doctor appointment, which still holds a lot of stigma in these areas as well. They come in thinking, I'm being treated as an artist. This is a lot of fun. It's exciting to write and record music. And because of that, our attrition rates are almost nil. If people start the program, they stick to it because, again, it's exciting. While that is happening, again, the therapist interjects the therapy in a way that is not particularly noticed. The second important piece to that is, if you are a survivor of extreme conflict, of extreme trauma like that, chances are the first song you help to write is the first time you've talked about the incident, because directly talking about it will actually re-traumatize you, which obviously is not something you want to do. But through the lyric writing process and using metaphor, it is a way to access that trauma in the brain that doesn't re-traumatize. So usually, again, that first song or two that someone helps to write is usually the first time the particular incident has been articulated. And once it's been articulated, the therapist or psychologist in the room can also set a separate treatment pathway forward without the participant knowing. And again, that's another reason why we've been so successful. The byproduct of this is music. So again, the local music producer helps to actualize the ideas and the melodies from the participants, and help to turn them into full blown out songs. When that occurs at the end of month 3, that comes back to us in Canada, and we have a team of about 100 mixing and mastering engineers, and we have Grammy winners and Oscar winners on the team. They volunteer. They do the what we call the post production and the final polish on the music. That gets sent back to the fields wherever we're working and gets disseminated in whatever local way that resonates with that community. In particular, in Africa, it still goes to that local AM radio stations. The radio in these areas is still king, and our listenership is millions of people. We also give them CDs, and we also have a record label on Warner Canada. So all the music is distributed globally across the world, just like any other major artist on all your favorite platforms. And we've also created new models, and we're the first in the world to do this literally, new models and new laws where people living in these conflict zones who may not exist in our eyes on paper the way we would recognize it, not having legal identification or a bank account that the West would recognize, but we've created ways, despite that, for them to own the intellectual property of their music and collect the royalties. So while it's not a lot of money, it symbolically does help the healing pathway as well. Because if you're living in that conflict zone, you're in war, chances are you've had literally everything taken away from you and you feel like you have no power. But what this does in a very small way, it demonstrates that that's not the case. You created this piece of music, this piece of art, and you technically and legally own it, and you get money back from it after it's played. That becomes a very powerful tool for someone's healing. The last piece of that on month 4 is our community concert. So it's kind of like the graduation. And we usually, quite frankly, sell out every concert. Our last concert in an area called Chimbulu in eastern Congo, which is under heavy conflict, had literally over 1,100 people show up to it. And what that does is it's the moment where it helps to cohere the community back together. Because as I mentioned, for example, if you're a woman who is a survivor of sexual violence, or sometimes a man, and again, you've been stigmatized, shunned, kicked out of your community for something that was no fault to your own, all of a sudden you're on stage in front of 1,000 people and you're owning your story, what happened to you, but doing it through a catchy pop song. And what that does is it alchemizes the moment so people don't view them as victims anymore. They view them as empowered artists. And I've seen this firsthand countless times where that moment literally changes the whole community, where the husband will ask the wife to come back to the home. I've seen it where mothers have started to bond and love their babies born of rape post-concert. And so that's the encompass of what Make Music Matter and Healing and Harmony does. And we are very serious about how we track our results. So as much as I'm still a producer and artist myself, and that's a very exciting front end, so to speak, the back end, since we're working with very vulnerable communities, is a very serious therapeutic intervention that is quantified. So we literally score through standardized tools every single participant that goes in. So they're scored on their PTSD, anxiety, and depression going in, and they're scored going out. So we know how good of a job we're doing. And our formal peer-reviewed research, the first one published by Cambridge last year, has demonstrated that this has miraculous results in the reduction of that trauma. And not only that, it sticks over time. So we've been able to test up to 6 months post-program, and their healing is still the same despite living in an active conflict zone. So that encompasses Make Music Matters work in general. We've operated in 8 countries. Again, our flagship is still the Democratic Republic of Congo. I think we have either 5 or 6 active studios there right now, plus Rwanda, Guinea, South Africa, Uganda, Turkey/Syria, Peru, and soon to be Canada. We actually have 3 potentials in Canada as we speak. I'm going to talk about the Ukraine project as well for a moment, but I would love to screen back of our guest with Gary. Yeah, thank you. Or else it's very strange. I'm just talking to myself on my screen, and it's a little disturbing. So I always like to see some friendly faces. Thanks. Okay, so that's Make Music Matters work in a nutshell. This Ukraine art project, where I'm leaving August 2nd for, is a way to humanize a conflict. So I strongly feel in the West we see things on the news, and while we get images every day, um, it doesn't resonate in the same way. Eventually, people become numbers. So the trick is, how do you turn these overwhelming statistics back into flesh and blood people that walk and talk? And that's the only way empathy and real action is going to happen. If statistics eventually lead to people becoming two-dimensional characters, it's hard for us to want to help a two-dimensional character. So the idea behind this was, how do we turn the atrocities that are happening now? How do we turn the overwhelming statistics of what's happening now in Ukraine into individual people that we here will resonate with, and hopefully then do something long term? So what I am going to do is, again, heading August 2nd with a well-known photographer from Los Angeles, and we're going to document about 10 to 12 artists and musicians that have their lives changed from the conflict. And we're going to photograph them and do little moving gifs of each artist and something that represents their life. And then I'm going to also audio record them, whether they're a musician and want to sing a little bit, maybe they're a poet and they want to read some poetry, but I'm going to take that raw audio from them as well, do post-production on it, send that out to the world, in which I have a lot of well-known sort of famous musician friends that will add to it. And then we'll create this little musical clip that represents their life. And that musical clip will get embedded into this large-scale photograph, and each will become an art installation on its own. And hopefully together, that will create something, again, that lasts longer than a news cycle. And that's the whole point of it. And in particular, we have our debut installation set on Parliament Hill in Ottawa, late fall, with all major federal parties coming together to do this. And then after, we're talking to other museum entities as well to make this, again, last longer than a moment, and hopefully go on the road with it as well. I think that's the most expeditious explanation I could do of the work and the project itself within the 50-minute time period.
Thank you so much, Darcy. It is such an important illustration that we have received from you about the project that you are already running, and you are going to undertake a new one in Ukraine. Ladies and gentlemen, I think it is also pertinent to congratulate Darcy to receive the Order of Manitoba. And as an innovator, the press release says that Ataman attributes his success to simply not giving up, which is very important. And let me also quote here something that Darcy said: establishing trust and building relationship within communities we serve is critical. The only reason I have been successful is because extremely vulnerable people are essentially allowing me into their home and letting us be of service to them. It's a completely symbiotic relationship, unquote. That is such a beautiful news for our audience today. Ladies and gentlemen, as we promised, we'll switch to a little bit of conversational mode now with Darcy, learning more about his insights. And as I welcome our advisors and our guest today from recently arrived Ukraine, let me just share briefly about Project Idea, because this project idea is also important. If you recall what Darcy says, that in this war, the aim is to humanize the matter, not the statistics in the war. So the project idea that we are running from Conflict and Resilience Research Institute, it supports Government of Canada's three objectives: helping to develop the tools and skills necessary to better equip Canadians in the face of disinformation, building capacity to address disinformation and other related online harms and threats to our country's democracy and social cohesion, and finally, empowering Canadians to take steps to mitigate against the potential impact of disinformation and other harms. And this is particularly important because we receive tons of information through social media and even through the regular media channels. And it is important to tie this up with Darcy's work that we have to understand that the casualties of war are just not numbers, even the survivors. They are actual human beings, those who have undergone traumatic episode because of war. So now it's time to invite our advisors to this discussion. I will request David Newman to come forward if you have any questions and comments about Darcy's project. Thank you.
Yeah, I'm absolutely thrilled that this has been arranged to give you a voice for the amazing contribution you and those working with you are making to deal with the survivors of trauma in different parts of the world where there is an obvious challenge for you to be trusted enough to be accepted in different cultures with different languages, with different histories, and coming from a country of privilege and prosperity. So my first question is, how did you earn that trust in the ways that you have to spread it from country to country, culture to culture, language to language, situation to situation?
No, it's a great question, and it's a critically important question as well, because we talk a lot about in this work about community ownership in projects, and the thing is, the reason why that's important is because it's the only way anything lasts, and gets through the hard times if the community truly adopts an intervention, a program. And the only way that happens is trust. So what I tell partners and staff all the time, my line is, imagine you're walking into somebody's home and telling them how to live. That's essentially what you're doing. Even if you're correct and it's the right thing to do, that's what you're doing. And I would be reticent of any stranger walking into my home and saying, hey, you know what, maybe you should put the TV over there, even if they're correct. So to get around that is you have to demonstrate you're going to be there long term for the right reasons. So the best example I can first give, again, our flagship site in Bukavu in Congo with Dr. Mukwege, how I got around it, I literally lived there off and on for 3 years as a local before I got my first meeting with Dr. Mukwege. And the reason is, I could have maybe gotten it beforehand, but what happens in these areas is people come, they get affected, they say, this is awful, they take their photos, they go home, and they never come back. That is typically what happens. They go back to their regular life because, frankly, life in the field in conflict zones is hard. The atrocities, the danger, there's no easy way around it. It is difficult work. So people living in these areas are used to that and are very reticent of outsiders. And then extrapolate that further back culturally. Look at Congo. You can take it all the way back to King Leopold, the Belgians in the 1800s, where it's in the DNA of being abused, where millions are slaughtered for the rubber trade that sparked the automotive industry. So the only way around that is to prove you're going to be there long-term for the right reasons. So I, again, spent 3 years as a local, again, living like a local there, not as an expat with maybe some money and all that, but literally without water or electricity or anything like that, to demonstrate I would be there long-term for the right reasons. While I did that, I followed up and proved every little promise along the way. So if I said I was going to research X and bring back this information to take the next step, I did. And then also what I did during that time was I had my idea for the Healing and Harmony program, but I did community consultations all throughout those 3 years, and then iterated the model through the feedback of the community. And then when I got my first meeting with Dr. McQuege, who was already impressed that, yes, this guy wouldn't leave for 3 years, basically, I could demonstrate that, look at all the community feedback I've gotten. This is how they think the program should go. So that's how you get around it, quite honestly. There's no way to cut the corners at all. But it does serve you, because when you go through the hard times, and you will in this work, there will be unexpected things. I get unexpected stuff daily still. And you'll have funding problems that are delayed, and tax and things like that. The only way you get through that truly is if the community does adopt the model in the program. If they really truly love it, they fight along with you. So that is, again, critically important. And then what we did was bake that into our standard operating procedures in our model. So once I had that experience, we codified it. So every time we open a new site, or even a new cycle, so every 4 months, wherever we work, we do what we call a community sensitization period, where we gather the local leaders and we figure out who in the community trusts. And you do these sensitization periods about, this is the program we're bringing in. What do you guys think of it? Do you have any feedback on it? And that exchange, always done in the local language with the local people, is what gets around, is the final piece to get around the issue that you're talking about. But the short answer is, you cannot buy your way out of it. Like, you have to demonstrate you are truly there for the long term. And that means boots on the ground. You have to be there.
I now turn it over to Gary. But one question that I'm certainly interested in is the determinants that you have created to measure in generally acceptable ways the impacts of what you have been doing, and a commentary on that, and how it has impacted the willingness of investors from philanthropic organizations, governments, and local community people and individuals to support this amazing work that you're doing.
Thank you very much. I think it's time to invite Gary to the discussion. Gary, please let your questions and comments now. Thank you.
Thank you, Kauser. And Darcy, it's a pleasure, just to hear the work you're doing and be able to share it a little bit more broadly. I'll talk a little more about the Ukraine piece next and introduce to you the lady sitting beside me, Anastasia Byskin. But first, just a question back to the Congo. All your good work, you've had some incredible mentorship. So one of the people that you've worked with closely was Dr. McQuebe. And can you just try to encapsulate the passion of that man to work so hard for his country?
Yeah, I'll try to be efficient, because I could talk about him for days on end without breathing. He is, I'm not exaggerating. I've probably known him for almost 10 years now. He's a magical man. In a facetious way, first of all, I joke, there's human beings like us, and there's certain people that are just not quite human, that are a notch above. And he's one of them. He can see 5 years ahead always. It's quite fascinating. But what makes him so, one of the things that makes him so special, and an example of this is, he's a literal genius who's an excellent doctor. Again, Nobel Peace Prize laureate. And he chooses to stay where he is. He could be anywhere in the world right now having a pretty easy life as a doctor or a professor, whatever the case is. But despite his many assassination attempts against him, he chooses to still stay there. So here is a man, as an example, that will literally fly to meet President Biden, who he's been friends with for many years, or with President Macron from France, and he stays with both of them. When he's in France, he stays with Macron. He does that, and then he goes back to Congo, where he lives literally in a slum, where he needs about 10 UN guards just to go to the washroom, and that's his daily life. So the fact that he chooses that, I think, encapsulates his sort of passion. But it's that tenacity piece as well, where his first hospital in 1999 in Lemira, when he went home for a weekend to visit his family, the Rwandan rebels came in and literally slaughtered all his patients in their beds and burned the place down. And it still haunts him to this day. But what he did was, okay, we're rebuilding. And, it's just no matter what happens, he just, continues on. It's really fascinating. And then, the other piece is just the financial end to it. He doesn't, I know there's people, I shouldn't say too much, but secretly in Europe that are putting together a pension for him because he doesn't keep anything. So all his prize money from the Nobel or anything else that he gets is written directly to the hospital. He literally does not keep one penny. He lives in this humble little cottage on the hospital grounds, and it's utterly fascinating to me to watch this sort of lifelong dedication. I hope that answered it okay. Sorry, Gary.
No, thank you very much, Darcy. And, I think, people often say, what can I do? Some people can do little things. Some people can do big things. But what you mentioned is he stays in the game like mentioned you did at your time in the Congo, the resilience
yes,
to take, the pressures that life puts on us and, still shine through.
Mm-hmm.
I read a book, and I'll just mention it because it was very powerful. And it's called The Power of Women. And it's just been released recently by Dr. McQuaggy. And it actually goes through and explains his life and a little bit more about him, and very, very strong book. So maybe I'll move quickly to Ukraine. So my wife has a Ukrainian heritage. Many people do in Winnipeg, Manitoba. We have about 187,000 people here that have ancestry traced to the Ukrainians. But more than that, both my wife and I are lawyers, and the aggression and sort of breach of the rules of law in every which manner that you can think of by the Russian Federation and Putin, leads me to try to ask everyone to do what they can. So in Manitoba, we have a group called Manitoba Operation Blue Skies that works with the Ukrainian Canadian Congress. And we're just starting a homestay program to try to help those that are, fleeing the war or at least getting out of the country in the moment. And many of these people are women and children as well that are taking the time over here. And if you go to that website, Manitoba Operation Blue Skies, you'll see what we're talking about. And if you have an opportunity in Manitoba to do a homestay, I think you'll find it a very worthwhile thing. And Anastasia here is actually staying with us. And I'll just briefly introduce her and she can say hi.
Yeah, hi everybody. Nice to meet you. Slava Ukraini.
So Darcy, the project then you are going to Ukraine. I find it interesting. One of Putin's comments in justifying the war is that, the Ukrainians don't really have their own culture. And, that, as we'll find out in another webinar, is really an attempt at genocide to say a culture didn't exist or doesn't exist. In fact, the Ukrainian culture is so rich and varied. And what you're going to try to evidence and bring forward is just some of the passion of the music, even in this difficult scenario. So you're going to be on the ground. You're going to be there shortly. Maybe just describe a little bit about what you expect you'll find there.
I in the toughest of situations, I usually find honestly the most beautiful art. And that may sound a little trite, but it's not, because my experience of in the last 10, 12 years in these in the field and conflict and post-conflict zones is in these extreme areas. As a human beings, all of your sort of artifices are stripped away. So what's left in terms of what you're going to express musically, artistically, is really genuine, sincere, and pure. And because of that, it's really powerful. And that has been my experience, again, wherever we worked in the world. So I expect the same thing. I've already spoken to a couple of musicians. I think they're out in Kyiv, and it's fascinating. I forget the name of the group, but there's one that is still doing live streams every week, and every week the donations go to a local children's hospital in Kyiv. And there's another gentleman who's actually quite a well-known hip-hop artist, and I'm sorry I forget his name, in Kyiv as well, and he's delivering munitions to the east. But in between that, I can see he's putting shows on in Kyiv again to packed audiences, and it's really awesome to see. And the music has been utterly fantastic. So I'm expecting, honestly, to be very moved and to hear really powerful pieces of music and art, because of the fact all the daily life things are stripped away, and what you're left again is sort of like a raw nerve. And artistically, that's what excites me the most, is when people are sort of that raw nerve, because what comes out of it is really powerful. So a quick example, which is this not Ukraine, but I think is prescient here, is one of the well-known songs that came out of Congo with a bunch of women who are survivors of sexual violence. Is called "The Criminal Father," and it talks about the men in the community who either conduct the rapes or don't stop them or support them in some way. And this song a few years ago became like a local little hit in the mornings on the radio station there. And I was there for it. And the military started to call into the radio station to complain, to say, stop playing the song. We're quote unquote the good guys, and we don't do that anymore. And that's a complete and utter lie. But it's so fascinating that these are the people literally with the guns and the bullets and the missiles, and they're scared of a bunch of people with the songs. And so I don't think we should minimize the impact of what art and music could do. It really sort of inverts a power paradigm, and I'm expecting to get the same thing, honestly, when I'm there.
Mm-hmm. And one of the people that you may have the opportunity to meet is Sophia Fedina, who we've had in earlier webinars. She's a member of Parliament and is an amazing folk singer for the war and now, and just provides another inspiration in terms of culture and demonstrating that in the midst of this adversity that she's facing.
Yeah, sorry to finish that. The other thing that's important, I think, to recognize in the music I've heard so far is I'm expecting this, and I'm looking forward to hearing something that is indigenous. So what I have learned from Make Music Matters work is, years ago there was an expectation that a Western standard was the good standard. Everyone wanted to have their music, pop music, hip hop, sound like whatever comes out of North America. That is not the case anymore. There's cultural adaptation, and they prefer their local cultural adaptation. So the hip hop that I've heard recently from Keith, from this artist that I've been talking to, I mean, it's definitely hip hop, but it is really unique, and it's, I think, I would guess, unique to that area of Ukraine in particular. And I like the fact that they're excited about it, that they're not chasing just this sort of Western standard, which who says that's the right thing? They're going for their own style.
Mm-hmm. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Gary. I think it's time to invite and welcome Anastasia, if you have any questions, comments, and particularly we are interested to listen from your insights about Darcy's project and overall, what do you think about disinformation and the war itself? Anastasia, floor is yours, ma'am.
Yeah, I want to thank Darcy for this incredible project. As you may know, for Ukrainians, music is crucial. So, and as you may know, many Ukrainian celebrities now are defending our country, namely Taras Topov, Untitled band, who actually released a famous a track, which is viral now, with Ed Sheeran, Two Steps. And also we have Fagot from Tanok na Maidani Konho band and Andriy Hlivlyuk, who made this viral video singing Червона Kalina in the middle of empty, kind of like center of Kiev, you may say that. And actually, Andriy Hlivlyuk, 2 months ago, he was wounded by something mortar shelling. Yeah, and his face and eye were injured, but now he's okay, and he continued to fight for us. So yeah.
And Kauser, I provided you with a few links to music. You may not have received it yet, but maybe we can put it later on the webinar. Or if you've received it, you could play one at the end, perhaps. And
thank you so much.
Being in Winnipeg, we also had the pleasure of the Winnipeg Folk Festival weekend, and Anastasia was able to join us there. And there's a band who's a local band called Zarada, and they're doing a lot of work from a charitable perspective with relation to Ukraine, but they also have developed their own, sort of music with the Ukrainian roots, and it was wonderful to hear that shared at the Folk Festival.
Thank you so much, Gary. Ladies and gentlemen, in the audience, we would like to put up all the clips that we have received from Gary at the end of the webinar. You'll find it in our website. I think I do have one question for Darcy, and it is related to his work in Congo as well as his new project in Ukraine. Darcy, in this particular project, we are working on disinformation and how to really combat propaganda and disinformation during conflict, whether it is a low-intensity conflict in conflict or a full-scale, full-blown war in Ukraine. So given your huge experience working in Africa, and especially in the, as I said, low-intensity conflict zone, how do you really fight back disinformation related to your work, Dr. Mugambe's work, because other parties, those who do not like these kind of things to occur in their territory, they come up with stories, conspiracy theories, and propaganda just to derail the initiatives that you folks take. So what are the steps you particularly have taken in the projects in Africa? And do you have something in mind when you land in Ukraine to repeat the same?
Yes, I do. It's a simple thought, but it's the what I think is the correct one. And first, before I answer, let me just say I'm humbled to be in your presence, Anastasia, and thank you for allowing me to talk about your country in front of you when you're the one that went through it and came here. So thank you for that. The propaganda piece is important. I myself have been a victim of that years ago, in a very, very serious way, people trying to stop my work. How you kind of inoculate yourself from that, again, it's this music. And it sounds silly, but it's not. And the reason is it is the stories coming from the people directly themselves. Right? So they write and record their music. We're able to release it locally and globally, which is why we work so hard to be the first ever to give The people we work with, the platforms on Warner, which are the same platforms that every other major artist, the Ed Sheerans, have. They're literally the same, the same platforms. Because nothing goes through a bias filter. It is their music, their songs, they wrote it directly, and it can go literally to everyone in the world. And if you just, again, extrapolate that to more and more participants and people, over time, I'm hoping that creates some sort of bulwark against the propaganda. So already Make Music Matter has at least 35 albums out from all over the world. And you keep doing that, and hopefully, eventually, that overpowers the propaganda. It overpowers the journalists, because quite frankly, even Western journalists have a large bias because our news media is profit-based now, and which is a huge problem, I think. So there's an inherent bias there. So that's how you do it, is you give the people directly their own the same platforms that anyone else would have. And hopefully that's how again, hope you overcome that. And the other piece to that is, if you don't, what I have learned is the vacuum that's created gets filled up by the bad guys instantly. Like the other side, so to speak, is really sophisticated. You'd be surprised how sophisticated some of these rebel groups living in a forest are. And again, they will fill that gap with the propaganda in a heartbeat, which is why you have to continually get our music out there to, push against, so to speak. I hope that answered the question properly.
Absolutely. No, absolutely. Absolutely. I was very curious because you really work in a conflict zone, to the best of my knowledge, for many, many years. And you have, as you shared, how you experienced propaganda in your career of music. Just a complimentary quick question here, Darcy. What do you see the power of social media in disseminating your work? I understand, your works are mainstream. Albums are sold many million copies. So in this particular age of social media, where we share instantly something with somebody else, how do you think your work in particularly in the Ukraine project might impact diaspora people, both Russian and Ukrainian, in Canada?
Yeah, my honest feeling, I think this is a bit of an indirect answer, so forgive me, but it's true. It's true feelings for me. So hopefully this, again, is applicable. Again, it's not a direct answer, but what has occurred through the democratization of the technology, and coupled with the social media aspect, has really changed the landscape in the last number of years. So when I started this sort of work years ago, there was a bit of a separation in a bubble. I'd go over to Africa, and then I'd come home for a little bit, and there was a clear separation of us and them, and then the communication. But that has completely been eviscerated. So you have, certainly in Ukraine, I'm sure most people have a cell phone, and even in active conflict zones in the middle of nowhere, Eastern Congo, they might be living in a hut, but they have a pay-as-you-go cell phone, because that's their life. It's their communication. It's literally their doctor. It's their bank. It's everything. Because of that, there's no more illusion. So the whole equation of the world is seen. So people that, say, for example, are enslaved in a mine in Eastern Congo for the minerals that are on their cell phones, they understand their piece in the equation now. They completely get it. And what that's doing is it's causing a lot of anger. I've noticed that. There used to be, years ago, kind of an unknown, like a unspoken rule of, if you're, I'll just be honest, a white person coming into work, you are safe. Like, we don't touch, that is gone. Kidnappings in Eastern Congo are up 200%, because it's a cottage industry now. And it's because of that social media and the technologies that everyone now understands their place in the world. So they know they are suffering because we're benefiting over here. And again, put that across multiple continents and all that sort of stuff. You get a lot of anger, and you have a lot of I think that's what's contributing to terrorism, quite frankly. So it behooves us, to help our friends. And to that end as well, what Gary was saying before about what can we do, what can anyone do, I think it's important because of this notion that while not everyone needs to dedicate all day of their life to something like this. I understand that, but to understand that the illusions are gone, everyone understands their place in the world, good or bad, and because of that, it's easier to make friends than to fight enemies later. Just think of it like if the war in Ukraine was happening in Canada, would we be sitting around saying, well, it's okay, don't worry about it, it's just our lot in life? We would be livid and saying, where's the rest of the world helping us? And again, I've noticed that huge change the last few years in all these areas I go to. They completely get how we live and why we live this way. And I think it's critically important we just do our little part for that. Sorry, can I just ramble on for 1 second? The best example I can give, and forgive me if Gary, you've heard this, is I remember, a few years ago being on the border of Syria and Turkey. And I met some people that had just fled Syria, escaped, crossed the border. People my age, just young. Well, I'm not that young anymore, but youngish people. And we were chatting one evening, and this guy said, no, you don't understand. We know you've been seeing the images all day, every day for the last number of years of the Syrian war. We get it. We know no one's coming to help us, and we know why. Like, they understand the proxy war between Russia and China, and all that sort of stuff. And it was heartbreaking because he was right, and there's no good answer I can give. So that's an important note that, again, the illusion aspect is completely gone. It's very sophisticated with the social media. And because of that, I think it ups our responsibility just that much more in the world.
Thank you so much, Darcy. I think a very insightful discussion. We can go on hours, but for the sake of time, we are just at the last part of our webinar session today. Traditionally, we go back and listen to the last words of the presenters or speakers present here. So I'd just request Gary and Anastasia to say a few words with regards to Darcy's project. And then I will invite David Newman also for his remarks. And finally, I'll go to Darcy for his concluding remarks to end this session today. Darcy, please go ahead.
I defer all my time to Darcy and Gary.
Oh, jeez. Please, Gary.
Well,
Gary.
Anastasia.
Yeah, I'll go first. And I've been following Darcy's work for some time. And I think it's a very important work, and the power of music and other forms of culture, whether it's dance, poetry, spoken word, simply sharing stories is so important. The world is smaller now. So as Darcy said, we should get out there and meet our friends around the world and do the things you can do. And, not more, but don't be shocked at what you can do. And when you start doing things, how pleasurable it is, and with that, I will just say hosting someone, Anastasia's here. She only speaks 6 languages. I speak 1, and I'm still trying to do it better. So, you meet amazing people. And so I really just encourage people to think about that. It doesn't have to be that. It could be just helping with some funds. You could donate to get an airline ticket for someone who can't get out safely, easily themselves. So many Canadians can do that. So, and I'll just pass it over to Anastasia to say a few words.
I want to thank all of the Canadians who are helping Ukrainians. That's very important for us, and we are appreciating that. And hosting is important as well. And I'm thankful to Darcy and Gary who's hosting me. That's my Canadian hosting family. And yep, thank you all.
Thank you so much, Anastasia. And we are very proud to have you today in our session. Darcy, your last words, and then I'll formally conclude.
Okay. Well, thank you. Yeah, I think it's just, we say a lot of, especially at Make Music Matter, about the power of music and art. And again, it sounds flippant, but I truly believe it. So one of the reasons I think Make Music Matter has been successful is the aspect of what we do is very participatory. So again, you can be living in a war zone, had everything taken away from you, but you can sing still. Like, that doesn't cost anything. You don't need equipment, and that's a starting point. That's the starting point to getting your agency back, and then your self-esteem back. That's critically important. And to that end, think of, I think of some of my favorite poets, some Irish poets, of Seamus Heaney and stuff that's been written 200 years ago, and they died dirt poor, but they wrote this thing, and all they needed was a pencil and a piece of paper. And look how much power it has, because 200 years later, I'm still reading it and enjoying it, and in fact, one of my tattoos is one of his poems. So I just think that's it's exemplary of the power that it has, that again doesn't cost anything, but look, it still can resonate and contain energy hundreds of years later.
Thank you so much, Darcy, for a wonderful conclusion. Ladies and gentlemen, dear audience, we are going to conclude this session today with a couple of thoughts that I would like to personally bring to your attention and follow up. First, you have heard Darcy about his projects that he already ran in Congo and Syria, and he's going to Ukraine. And we are so hopeful that as he rightly mentioned, that you don't need much things to make a point. You just need a pencil, a paper, and your own voice. You don't even need an instrument. And we have seen in the case of Ukraine war, hundreds of people, musicians, artists, the orchestra team, they are playing in the bomb-shelled shelters and underground stations. So this is one of the things that I would like to bring to your attention, that please come and help Ukrainians during this unprovoked and unnecessary war and destruction of human lives. Second point I would like to mention here, that Project IDEA has been launched a month ago, and we are working to fight disinformation. And here, music is very, very important. As you have rightly heard from Gary Sent, that Russia is claiming that Ukraine doesn't have any culture. So this is what and where Darcy's work is so important, to bring to the greater world that Ukraine does have a very rich culture, and this is what the music looks like right from Ukraine during this war period. So with these two thoughts, I would like to conclude this session. I would like to thank Darcy Ataman for coming into our session, sharing his ideas and wonderful vision about his project in Ukraine. I would also like to thank two of our advisors to attend this session within their busy schedule, and also last but not least, Anastasia, for her presence here. It encourages us to work in this project. So please support Project IDEA. All the details are in www.crick.org, and we can work together for a better world. Stay well and stay fine till we meet again. Bye-bye.